August 26, 2017, a day that changed the whole sentiment surrounding the boxing and MMA fighting. It all started with a crossover match between the MMA fighter, Conor McGregor, and the boxing champion, Floyd Mayweather Jr. for a $25 million deal. And the rest is history. Since then, the crossover trend continued, with UFC fighters consistently calling out boxers to fight, but the surprising part is, neither the fans of MMA fighting nor the boxing fans really liked it. As you can see, it's no news that MMA fighters get into boxing only to make more money when they're struggling financially in MMA. Fighters like Ngannou challenging Fury want attention and money, but struggle because MMA fighters are paid less. The Mayweather-McGregor fight was also more about entertainment than serious competition. The situation sounds quite disgraceful, doesn't it? Why is there such discrimination between MMA fighters and boxers? Most importantly, why don't people like the trend of UFC fighters calling out boxers for fighting? And why the UFC fighters should stop this? To understand it better, let's dive deeper into the situation from the grassroots level. During his time as a successful UFC fighter, Conor McGregor always wanted to try his luck in boxing and talked about fighting Mayweather in a friendly match. At first, UFC boss Dana White said that it wouldn't happen, but later, he thought it would be entertaining to have a crossover between two different genres of fighting while making a lot of money in the process. So he himself offered Mayweather a $25 million deal. They officially announced the fight in June 2017, with a tour in July. On the fight night, McGregor was nearly 20 pounds heavier than Mayweather. The fight began with McGregor dominating early, but Mayweather changed his style to aim for a knockout. As the fight progressed, McGregor tired out, leading to a stoppage in favor of Mayweather. Finally, Mayweather beat McGregor in the 10th round with a technical knockout, or TKO, which got him the guaranteed $100 million, while McGregor got a guaranteed $30 million, as was the deal. Now, the main debatable part here is that if you watch the Mayweather-McGregor fight, it should make you think how strict the boxing rules are. Imagine if the referee didn't stop them in the clinch. Conor could hit Floyd's ribs. Not only in this match, but in the Ngannou vs. Fury match as well. Ngannou's best chance was in close fighting, but the referee kept separating them. It was Francis Ngannou's fight against Tyson Fury that was set for Saudi Arabia in July 2023, with the estimated prize money of $10 million for Ngannou and $50 million for Fury. Eventually, here as well, Fury won a split decision despite a knockout. Fury moved on to fight Usyk. Ngannou faced Joshua and lost in just 2 rounds again. And it's not only McGregor or Ngannou. So far, this is the epitome of all the UFC fighters calling out boxers in a crossover match. As you can see, none of the MMA fighters have been able to beat the boxers in these matches, simply because whenever this crossover match happens, they only abide by the strict rules of boxing, which throws the MMA fighters at an utter disadvantage in the boxing ring. Naturally, every time an MMA fighter signs up for a crossover match, he knows the chances are he will not win. But still, it's usually the MMA fighters who call out the boxers for this type of match. But why do they deliberately sign up to lose? It's simple. As a Reddit user explicitly said, the point is money. To understand it better, we have to look into some dark sides of sports management that many of you barely know about. No room for denying that Dana White has done a lot for the UFC. He took it from a small group of fans to a huge sport that everyone knows about. MMA used to be something only a few people liked, but now it's popular worldwide, and fighters can make millions of dollars in a single fight. But that's just what it looks like from the surface level. The original truth is quite different. Not everyone gets rich from it. While a handful of big stars do well, most MMA fighters struggle and need other jobs to make enough money. They have to pay for things like managers, gym fees, taxes, and team costs. After all these expensive deductions, they don't end up with as much as you might think. Plus, most UFC fighters might fight once or twice a year, maybe 3 times at most. So even though they make money from fights, it's not enough to live on. On the other hand, boxers make a lot more money than UFC fighters. For example, at a recent UFC event, the fighters made about $1.5 million together, not counting what they get from pay-per-view. But a boxer like Tyson Fury can make around $30 million in one fight, which is 20 times more than an MMA fighter. This is not a single incident. Let me give you some more examples to understand the gap better. During the UFC 278 event, Kamaru Usman and Leon Edwards were the main fighters. Usman earned $750,000 plus a $42,000 bonus from sponsors. Edwards, on the other hand, made $400,000, got an extra $100,000 for winning, and received a $32,000 bonus from sponsors. Edwards also got an extra $50,000 for performing well that night. You see, combining all the prize money, none of them could achieve at least $1 million. Now, on the same day, there was a boxing match between Anthony Joshua and Alexander Usyk. These fighters split a guaranteed $150 million between them, not even counting sponsorships or pay-per-view money. What a massive disparity. Should it mean that boxing is much superior to MMA fighting in the sports hierarchy? No, absolutely not. But to find the answers behind it, we did some digging in this scenario and found out that the company that owns the UFC, Endeavor Group Holdings, is actually worth a lot of money, and makes a lot of money as well. But that only gives us a superficial picture. The issue is that the company also has a lot of debt and not much cash. This means they're not in great financial shape. In 2016, they sold the UFC for $4 billion to a company led by Ari Emanuel. Since then, the company hasn't done much better financially, which is a major problem. The stock value of Endeavor Group Holdings in the last 5 years has dropped by 30%. At first, people were worried they might go bankrupt, but when we look closer, we see that only the UFC, which is a small part of the company, is actually doing pretty well, adding a lot to the company's profits, more than the other parts. The UFC made over $1.2 billion in 2022 and had a big profit margin of 50%, even though Endeavor Group stock dropped by 44% in 2022. Naturally, fighters want to get paid more, but the president of the UFC, Dana White, wants to keep the company making a good profit while also growing, which means he's unable to pay fighters a raise. But why don't boxers face this kind of problem? The simple answer is, the world of boxing works quite differently. In boxing, there are many promoters and no single boss controlling everything. This means boxers can negotiate better deals and get paid more. On the other hand, the UFC is like a monopoly in MMA, so fighters have less power to negotiate for higher pay. For example, in UFC 196, Nate Diaz earned $620,000, and Conor McGregor earned $1 million for a fight that made $80 million. But in the boxing match between Anthony Joshua and Vladimir Klitschko, they each got around $17 million just from a $68 million event. So you see, UFC 196 made more money than the boxing event, but the boxers individually earned more than the UFC fighters. This shows how differently money is divided in these sports. UFC fighters usually get about 16% of the total earnings, and they work more like employees, so they have fewer chances to make money outside of their fights. But boxers from other leagues can get 40% to 50%. Plus, in boxing, stars like Anthony Joshua have more freedom to make deals and earn more through sponsorships. If you still wonder why, I have just 3 words for you. Cons of monopoly. Now the right question to ask is Dana White willing to change things? The answer is a heartbreaking no. He recently talked to GQ magazine and said he doesn't think fighters need more money.
And fighters always want to make more money. Boxing has absolutely been destroyed because of money and all the things that go on. It's never going to happen while I'm here. Believe me, these guys get paid what they're supposed to get paid.
He thinks fighters already get enough money based on how many people buy pay-per-view fights. He also said if fighters aren't happy, they can make their own MMA organization. As I just said, cons of monopoly. Naturally, it's next to impossible for any fighter to build a new MMA organization, so they are simply taking the easiest escape route from this underpaying monopoly trap. They discovered that boxing matches pay quite handsomely, even if you don't win. As a result, most of the MMA fighters are shamelessly going for it just to grab the prize money. But when we see the bigger picture, it's not only about the money. MMA fighters are not just losing in the boxing ring, they're also losing sportsmanship, legacy, and dignity. Frankly speaking, an MMA fighter can only be defeated by a boxer when the match is played solely by boxing rules. These rules don't give enough room for MMA fighters to utilize their skills. It's like signing up for a game they're already destined to lose. If the rules were different, blending both boxing and MMA rules selectively, MMA fighters would have an upper hand over boxers on any given day. Apart from that, MMA legends have some other disadvantages. For example, they find it a little tough to switch to boxing because they are usually older when they make the change. Fighters like Anderson Silva, Tyron Woodley, and Ben Askren, who were mostly known for their wrestling, struggled in boxing due to their limited boxing skills. Even Nate Diaz, famous in MMA, had a hard time in his recent boxing match against Jake Paul. Conor McGregor tried boxing while still in his prime, but it showed that elite boxers are way better at boxing than good MMA fighters. MMA fighters are good at many things like striking and grappling, while boxers focus only on boxing. This difference matters a lot in the boxing ring, where footwork and defense are key. Moving to boxing means mastering these specific skills, which is tough for MMA fighters used to a wider set of skills. Because honestly, MMA fighting and boxing are 2 completely different genres of fighting. MMA fighters and boxers train differently because of their sports rules. Boxers focus on footwork, head movement, and hitting accurately with big gloves. MMA fighters use a wider range of moves with smaller gloves. When an MMA fighter boxes against a pure boxer, they struggle to adjust their style, like Nate Diaz, who relied on toughness instead of adapting strategically. You might think, does glove size really matter? Yes, it does. A lot. Boxers have bigger gloves for boxing, but they need to hit smaller targets. Their stance helps with defense and power, but needs good conditioning for longer fights than MMA matches. In simple terms, keeping MMA and boxing separate seems more practical than mixing them up completely. Simply speaking, can you imagine soccer players playing a basketball match against NBA players just because, in both games, all you have to do is pass the ball and make it up to the opponent's goalpost? Even if that ever happens, do you think Messi, Ronaldo, or Mbappe would stand a chance against Michael Jordan, Steph Curry, and Kevin Durant? Definitely not. Or let's say if we merge both tennis and table tennis just because their nature is apparently the same, do you think we can see the greatness of Nadal or the royal backhand of Federer in table tennis? No. In both cases, NBA players and table tennis players would win without any tough competition. That way, the talents of all the players would just be wasted. It might look like a temporary entertainment and experiment, but if you keep a long-term view, it will just be a big bad farce for both the games and its fans. Just like what's happening now in the crossover games. It's neither a boxing match nor an MMA fighting. Now, some of you might say that there's a big reason why the UFC fighters are encouraging it, which we just discussed a while ago. No doubt that's a serious issue. But you know, the cure is always better than prevention. What the UFC fighters are doing now for money is a direct disgrace for them and for the boxers participating in it as well. It's just a temporary financial prevention for the MMA fighters. But if they want to cure this problem, they need to stop calling out boxers for a money fight and instead stand up against the UFC system to bring a change forever. Otherwise, some MMA fighters would make money in the losing money fight for sure. But the UFC will keep doing its monopoly and slowly, MMA fighting will return to its dormant state as it was before Dana White. What do you think? Are you a fan of these crossover matches? Do you also think it should stop? And what are your reasons? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe for more content, and turn on notifications to stay updated with our latest videos. Thanks for watching.